Welcome to the Encouragement Engineering Podcast, where we help people to combat the negativity that inundates our daily lives with a positive perspective and positive action. Today's guest is Andrea Johnson. Andrea is an optimism expert, professional encourager, and coach. Andrea has helped others find community and freedom through coaching, speaking, podcasting, and building a global community of women dedicated to authentic growth by following her 6 tenets of intentional optimism. That's a mouthful. Andrea has battled many personal battles such as weight gain, bulimia, depression, early menopause, anxiety, and the passing of her mother from cancer. Despite these life events, Andrea coaches high-performing, mission-minded women to grow, lead, and succeed using the 6 tenets: optimistic, present, energetic, courageous, wise, and intentional. Her mission is to empower women who have been told they are too much or too strong to be as big as they are created to be. Women lead in unique and glorious ways, and she is here to help them do so and do just that. So please welcome to the show, Andrea Johnson. Andrea, thank you so much for being here today. I really look forward to what you're offering our audience.
Hey, Bob. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, thank you. And it's great because I love the idea of a professional, encourager and optimist. We need that in our society today.
Absolutely. I mean, especially now, here we are, in 2021. Hopefully getting through this pandemic soon. I find that the further we get into it, the more it's needed, and people just run out of options sometimes. And when you can just give them a new way to see something, it really helps.
And I think that's critical, is that new way to see things. I think this has brought about a lot of that for everybody in our society, a new way of seeing, that we're real people, that we go through stuff. All of us do. And if we could, why don't we tell the audience about you and what you went through to get where you are today? Because obviously you've been through a couple things and it's not easy. So help us out with that. Tell us your story.
Well, we only have a few minutes. So, and I'm a little bit of a talker. I love to talk. So this is not, this is all great for me. But in a nutshell, we joked before we started recording here that the older you get, the more you realize you actually have a story. And when you're going through things, you just think they're your life. And I was raised a missionary kid overseas in Korea, which I didn't put in my bio. And I, had a real longing for community and a real longing to fit in. And when you have interesting things in your past, if you really want to fit in, you tend to downplay all of that. And I never quite fit in with anybody. And now I see that at my age, of an age, I see that as a really good thing. And I now celebrate the uniqueness and the beauty of everything that I was created to be. But for the longest time, I just couldn't. And when we're young, other people can try to tell us how to act. Other people, our parents tell us, that our school tells us, and we kind of, I for the longest time said I'm a square peg and they're trying to fit me in a round hole. And they do that for you and to you while you're young.
Yeah.
And at some point we take that on for ourselves, right? And I had to realize that I was taking that on for myself. And of course I didn't realize it at the time, but it did put me into bulimia and depression. And it did put me into some, I was a good kid, like I said, I'm a missionary kid, right? So I didn't drink, I didn't smoke. I just hid peanut butter under my bed. And, that sounded really benign, but when you're not quite 5 feet, 2 inches tall, and as an adult woman, you hit 310 pounds, that's no longer benign. Now, I turned 21 in the hospital for bulimia and depression, which is when I first started getting some tools on personal growth. And once you start putting tools in your tool belt, then you realize, wait a minute, there's a new way to do this. And so for the next years, I just kept gathering tools, and I went up and down, and I married late for my family at 27, met my husband in grad school, and I just couldn't quite cope with some of the hard things we went through. My husband's a pastor and has a big personality. I was told things like, the deacon sat me down and said, we're going to ask that your husband be fired, and it's all because of you. And, at the time they tried to tell me I was unkind and that I was unprofessional. And, when you're 29, there's when you're young and stupid, you're young and stupid. But there was never anything at the heart of me that was ever unkind. And they didn't understand me and I didn't understand them. And I will never, ever, my husband's still a pastor, and I will never fit the mold of a typical pastor's wife. And I had to come to grips with that. And so did they.
Yeah.
But when you hear things like that, you start thinking you're not good enough. You start thinking there's something wrong with me. And so that's when I did hit 310 pounds, and realizing very quickly that I didn't have the ability to get that off on my own. And then my mother was diagnosed with breast cancer. And I know that obesity is a huge factor in cancer diagnosis.
Right.
And I said, I have to do something. And my husband said, do what you have to do. I'll support you. And we were 10 years married and still no children. And we weren't really, really worried about it, but when you start thinking about those things, you realize I want to take care of myself. So I did, and became the model patient. I went from, I've lost almost 200 pounds.
Wow.
And at the end of March, it will be 16 years.
Wow.
So yeah. So
congratulations.
Thank you. And that's another way I support women. I have quite a few women that I know that have gone through gastric bypass but I've kind of like walked with them through it. And, but then, you start thinking, well, now it's really time to have children. The closer I get to 40, the more important it becomes. And that was when I was told I was in early menopause. And when somebody sits across the desk from you in a white coat and says, you have a 13% chance of a live birth using IVF, which is not a benign process, it really puts things into perspective. And I was raised around a lot of families with adopted children.
Right.
But I don't know if it was by the time I got to the parking lot or by the time we got home sitting in the backyard. But I clear as day remember saying, adoption's 100%. And if you're not raised with that, so it takes each person in the relationship, it takes a little while to get there. But all that to say, we have a 12-year-old boy who is amazing. And so, there's all these things that sound like challenges have turned out to be beautiful things. Even losing my mother was a little bit of the catalyst for really pushing me into the coaching space and kind of pushing me off the ledge and saying, it's time to help people. I can't just coast along anymore. I have to do something.
And that's a great way to look at it, because life is, as I said this, I think the other day in a social media post, life is weird. It gives us the test first and then the lesson after the test. And all through school, you're given the lesson and then the test. So it's a lot different, but you learn from those trials, you learn from those tribulations, you learn from those gut wrenching experiences. I think, this works, this doesn't work, or how can I grow from this? And you learned a lot. I'm sure, you saw the effects of, possible obesity, what it can do, whether your mother was that way or not, I don't know, but cancer, it doesn't care who you are, and it affects anybody. So I know that. I hate that disease. I hope we find a cure for it very quickly. We don't need it in our society.
Yeah.
But it teaches us a lot. It teaches us appreciation for life every day, especially when you lose loved ones. I know I lost my mother when I was 6 years old to cancer.
Oh, wow.
And you learn from that, you grow from that. It wasn't something that it's part of me, but what's also part of me is how I grew from that, how I took that and shifted that attitude. And I know with what you go through and what you share with women, that idea of, obviously you've been through a lot and you can walk with them in some of these issues. Do you see that as a good piece or a good tool, if you will, for not only yourself to share your story and what you went through, but helping the others get through that? Do you see the lights come on when you start to share that with others?
I do. And a lot of times being able to empathize with people makes a difference. And I learned that firsthand from the opposite end of that spectrum. My best friend lost her mother to cancer 20 some odd years ago, 25 years ago. And I didn't understand it at the time. I didn't understand her grief. I didn't understand what it was like. So when my mother hit the, okay, we don't know that there's anything else you can do, start heading into hospice. And this was 15 years with breast cancer, right? I mean, so there's always the, when is the other shoe going to drop? And it was a long process, and every PET scan was nerves. And, but she was then able to say, all right, I know what this is going to be like. And she had never really shared these things with me before. But then she said, okay, don't be surprised if this happens. Don't be surprised if this happens. Don't be surprised if you feel these things. And it, of course, it strengthened our relationship. But it also then alerted me to the fact that I don't see all the sides, right? Until you experience things, you don't see them. And so that was a big piece of my learning, to open my eyes and to be able to say, okay, just my only perspective, mine alone, is not the only one that there is. And, those things, in your head. I'm going to tell you, I'm old, right? Many years ago, I was an Amway distributor.
Okay.
And so one of the things they would always say is the longest 12 inches in the world between your brain and your heart.
Yep.
And it's just getting it there. It's like, it's the knowledge versus the wisdom. It's the experience versus the library card. And when you have that, you can then walk other people through it. And when I first started coaching, we did some peer coaching with I'm a John Maxwell team certified coach.
Good.
So talk about positive, right?
Yes.
I mean, it's all leadership, very positive. And so we did some peer coaching, and I got paired up with this amazing woman who speaks at the UN and does all this stuff internationally. And the best advice she gave me was, you need to write your own story. And I said, why? And she said, because if you're going to hang your shingle out there and coach women, you have no idea who's walking in the door. And you need to really know your story to know whether or not you can help them. And one of my strengths is just being transparent. Sometimes there's a dark side to that. I just give too much. But being able to share my own story it builds rapport, and it builds connection, and it helps them see, oh, I'm not in this alone. And when we know that we're not in something alone, everything looks better.
And like we were talking about earlier, with the pandemic and what's been going on, people need to realize that. People need to understand, there's others that feel the same way I feel. There's others that are experiencing the same things I'm feeling. And you're a great example of that.
Thank you.
When it's interesting that you talk about the idea of women being told they're too big or too strong. What do you think is that just for women, or is that a view from corporate organizations or society? What does that view come from?
Well, I was born and raised in the Southern Baptist life. And so some of that comes from that demographic, from the evangelical community.
Right.
It comes a little bit from the South. My family is from Southeast Texas.
Okay.
And I'm in Virginia. And I literally was looking at, where is he? Oh, man, I wish I was in St. Petersburg.
Yeah.
We were there too.
Michigan, so.
Well, I was going to say, you don't sound like you're from Florida, but you got smart and went down there, right? No, I totally have lost my train of thought. What was the question?
That's why we do these. What do you think that idea of too big, too strong?
Yeah.
I mean,
so it's a pain point for me, which is why I conveniently forgot the question. Going back to even what they told me, those deacons sitting in my husband's office, I was too loud. Women are, and this is where I'm going to get in trouble. Yeah, well, this is where I'm going to get in trouble with the evangelical community. And I have tiptoed up to the line using the words toxic patriarchy. It's not everywhere, but there's a good bit of that in this country. And there's a good bit of that in the evangelical community. I met my husband, I said, in grad school, but I met him in seminary. And I was getting my master's of divinity. And I don't have it finished. It's a full 96-hour degree. And I put my husband through school and made straight A's, and didn't get to finish because I was going part-time.
Right.
And even in that curriculum, I was not allowed to take the preaching courses. And now I'm not interested in being a preacher. I just want to, this is my faith. You know, I thought I was going to be a missionary, or, I mean, I still want to go back and finish and get my PhD in women's studies. Right. But it was those kinds of things. I've had theological conversations with my husband and two other pastors, where I was very well holding. I have opinions, you know, I just do. And I was told that women aren't supposed to have opinions, right? But I was in a conversation, and I'll not forget it ever, where we were having a good theological discussion. And I asked a question, mostly because I knew the answer. I wanted to know what he thought.
Mm-hmm.
And this gentleman looked at me and said, "You wouldn't understand, little lady." And
Mm-hmm.
I looked at my husband and I said, "I think I need to find the restroom."
Yeah.
And which is actually a huge amount of constraint for me, because I am known for responding emotionally.
Okay.
I am an Enneagram 7, if you know what that is. I am a Myers-Briggs ENFP. I'm the entertainer, and
Right.
you know, a little bit of Joan of Arc in there. And my strengths are things like activator and relator. So it's like, I love the way you say you're going to do something. I'm totally with you. It's like, if you know something, you have to do something. Right. So for me, being in that kind of environment all of my life has been really hard. And it's not that I differ with them on, I believe the Bible is God's word, right? It's like my faith is stronger than it's ever been. But now I have more openness to everybody else. And what I'm being told by women who have been through hurting things, or through painful and traumatic things, is, "You're a safe place for me." I'm like, oh,
okay.
you know, it's like, even just saying that, I get cold chills, because I'm so humbled and honored. I had women who were safe places for me to be able to talk about those things, but they were still stay-at-home, not working women. And to have a career, I didn't have a career because I really wanted one. I thought I wanted to stay home, because that's what you do, right? That's
Right.
it's the American dream, right? It's like very Mad Men, right? And so I've just come to understand that there are a lot of things in that world that are just very social. It's very much social constructs rather than actually aligning with scripture. And that's a hard thing to part from. You get called all kinds of names, and when people don't have any clue what you know or you believe. And I love to be related. I love relating to people. So when people are upset with me, it's like, what? No, that's terrible. So yeah, I think that part of it is Southern, part of it, and we've come through 4 years of political situation where that viewpoint has been very much celebrated. And so, you know, it just, that's what I mean by women are told in the community that I was raised in to just be demure and quiet and gracious and kind. You know, it's like,
Well, it's
I can
interesting.
be all those things except for quiet and demure, you know.
Well, and you think it, you bring up your theological studies, and you think of what Jesus did. He wasn't quiet. He was out there tearing stuff up. He, you know, to have that strength that, okay, I don't really care what other people think, even though he knew what they thought, but to have that, you know, that
And he called him on it.
Exactly. Yeah, he called him out on it. To have that conviction and know that you're here for a purpose. I think that's a bigger calling, like you said, that knowing what you're here for will outweigh those ideas or those things. And I think that's a great way to show people to say, hey, we're built for greatness. It doesn't matter, men, women. You're built for greatness because God created us. So let's use that. Let's go with that and realize the value we can provide, not only for ourselves, but for others. And that's a bigger picture, is creating that value for others. I think that's very important. If you could share us your belief about encouragement.
About encouragement. Okay. So, like I said, one encourager to another. When I call myself a professional encourager, part of that is because I do have a sunny personality, you know, and I was voted best smile in my class of 30 people when I graduated from high school. But I do have a sunny disposition. Even a friend of mine said to me 2 days ago, she said, I love that even when you're drained, when you go to bed, you wake up the next morning and you've got a smile on your face. And it wasn't always that way, I won't lie. But when you have that ability to share with others, when I talk to people about being a leader has something, part of being a leader has to do with being able to share your vision. And sometimes that vision is being able to see what others can't see. Some of it is being able to see what's coming down the pike, which I can do both of those. But I was raised in Korea, and in ancient Korea, the women were not allowed to go. All the towns were walled and the houses were walled and that kind of thing. It was just, that's the kind of society it was. And you had that in a lot of Eastern countries, but the women were not supposed to go outside of those walls, and they really wanted to see out. So what they would do is they would build these seesaw looking things with a board on a big bag of rice. Okay. And so they would jump standing up on it. They would jump so that they could see over the walls. Okay. And because they wanted to know what was going on out there. And so I see it as my job. When I can see what's out there, I tell people, right? So I was interviewing a client once, and I've now conscripted this, and because I love the way she said it. She said, I see the big picture and I sweat the small stuff, and I love it. Yeah. And I always saw that in myself as a conflict, but she even helped me turn that around because I can see the big picture. So I help people see that big picture, and it encourages them to know that there are not, there's not really just limited answers. There's always an option. And I think that when we do that for other people, we build them up in ways and we empower them in ways that they didn't have before. And I think that's what encouragement is.
I like that because, and I picture things in my mind, and I don't know why this just came to me, but I see encouragement like a snow shovel. It's clearing that mess off the sidewalk. Getting that off so we have a clear path, so we have a secure path, if you will, to go forward into our life, no matter where that path may lead us. You won't slip, you won't necessarily fall. And if you do, okay, we can get through this. Realizing that, I think, is important. So thank you for that. That's sure. Great. Appreciate that. Optimism, encouragement, they're not Pollyanna ideas.
No.
Tell us about that. What is your belief on that?
So the reason I use the term intentional optimism is because when I was looking for, and that's actually the name of my company, it's Intentional Optimist LLC. And when I was looking for how I was going to name my company, I really wanted to use the old fashioned word sanguine. I really wanted to do that. And my friend was like, nobody knows what that means. You can't use it. And so optimism was the next best thing. But I needed to put intentional in there because it's a choice. It's an active pursuit. It's not something that falls out of the sky for you. Some of us are born with, right. It's not the sunbeams that come down from the clouds. And it's not even being able to only see the bright side. That's just part of it. The only way you can see the bright side is when you're willing to see the dark side. Yeah. And, it's that old Eastern yin yang. You can't expect to just get it by osmosis. You have to pursue it. And so that's what I teach people. I started off with intentional optimism and the 6 tenets as a philosophy. Yeah. And it didn't take long for me to realize this is not a philosophy. This is a personal growth plan because it really is active. And now I've transitioned it all into talking about it from the perspective of a sailboat because, you have to actually plan to get in the boat and do something about it. So it's an active pursuit.
And that's a great idea because so many people, they want that osmosis. They don't want to have to work. And sorry, but that's not always the case. In life, we realize that, you want the yard to look great. You got to get out there, get your hands dirty, get the weeds out of the lawn, fertilize the lawn, do certain things. You want your kids to be brought up right. You've got to guide them. It's not just sit back and let them do whatever they want. It is an active role, and that is always a hard role. I've got 3 boys.
Yeah. Well, I only have 1. That's enough.
Yeah, exactly. My youngest is going to college this year, so it's.
Oh, congratulations!
Thank you. So he's proud of that, but the idea of that encouragement, optimism, you're so right. It's an active role in our lives, and it's not Pollyanna. People say, well, it's just a belief system. It is, but that belief gets you through a lot of things that you have to go through, that you're going to have to take action on. And it gets you, like you said, you get up in the morning, you got a smile on your face. That's active participation in this thing we call life. Things are going to happen. We can choose to be, grateful or not. I wake up every day and say, thank you, Lord, for this day. Bless the boys. Let's go. Let's try a new thing. I may have screwed up yesterday, but today's a new day.
Yeah.
So, thanks for that reminder. And you mentioned your 6 tenets: optimistic, present, energetic, courageous, wise, and intentional. Do you have a favorite, or what, one of those that would be first, do you think?
I think of all of them, the one that comes the most natural to me is intentional. And even down to things like, I'm no longer, I still have a job outside of my coaching. And I'm now 100% remote, but when I wasn't, and I worked for 10 years at Johns Hopkins, the oncology center. And so now I'm at another university, but even when I walk, people always say, I know when you're coming. I'm like, I'm going somewhere. I'm never just strolling along. You can always hear me, especially when I wear heels. And I had a nurse that would say, here she comes, clomp, clomp, clomp. And I'm like, hey, you know when I'm coming, right?
Right.
For me, intentional is probably the most natural. And in the way I describe intentional optimism as a plan, it is the thing that pulls all the pieces together. It pulls together the rudder of wisdom. It pulls together the sail of energy, the ropes and the rigging of courage, the boat of optimism, and the centerboard of presence that holds you upright. And intentional is the thing that helps you actually get your boat. I grew up in Korea on the West Coast at a beach, and we had little sunfish and laser, little tiny sailboats, right? Intentionality is what gets your boat off the sand and into the waves and into the water where you can actually do something with it. And even we had somebody, I think maybe it was a deacon, when we were in Baltimore, said to my husband, said, you guys don't do anything that's not intentional. So it resonates well with me and my husband.
Right.
There's a reason. We all have reasons for what we do. It's acknowledging what those reasons are. And I just finished recording my podcast episode for next Monday, that'll come out on the 15th. And it's all about purpose, which is part of intentionality. Wow. And, I talk about discovering your why. And I'm a values coach. I feel very strongly that you need to know what your core values are. And if you don't, there are great resources, but they're your guardrails, right? So that's why intentionality is so important to me, because that's what helps me make my choices with my core values of community first, authenticity second, and freedom third. If whatever I'm being offered doesn't ring true, at least if it's yes for all three, let's do it. If it's no for at least one of those, then I got to think about it. And if it's no for all of them, it's an easy walk away, right? It's like, it takes the guesswork out of it. It makes it less emotional, but it also means that whatever I do, I'm doing with the intention of being true to my core purpose.
Right. And it is your life. I mean, why not be true to your core beliefs, your core values? And it's interesting because you mentioned John Maxwell. I mean, that's his lane. That's what he talks about. He's as a former preacher, that's what he lives. Zig Ziglar, same thing. You have certain principles, certain values that you can't stray from. And you brought up a great idea of it keeps you in that lane. It keeps you from the yellow line to the yellow line. Let's stay between there. It's going to go left. It's going to go right. But if we stay on the road, we're doing real good. It's when you go off onto the side into the ditches and everything like that, that things can get, fairly messed up. So,
well, and I talk about them in the sense that you can actually build them strong enough that they become the guardrails, right? So that you can bounce around in there like a bumper car. And I even, with some people, talk about the bumpers that you put up in a bowling alley for kids to bowl. And it means that you're more likely to hit the pin down there at the end, right? And you may have to do that at the beginning and make them really rigid, but then eventually you get to where, just like when you learn to drive, you're not hitting the guardrails. You're actually staying within those yellow lines.
You're supposed to stay away from those.
Yeah. Yeah, I have to tell you a story. My dad went with his brother and my aunt to Scotland because my maiden name is McEachern. And so they went, and of course, you're driving on the opposite side of the
Yeah.
road than we do here. But the thing that just really messed them up the most at their age was the narrow lanes.
Oh,
Everything was so, I mean, and when you go to Europe, people laugh at us, or when Europeans come to the United States, the roads are really wide here. Even
yeah.
our narrow lanes are
Narrower
really
car.
wide.
Yeah.
It's like they're all built for Hummers. So anyway, stay within the lines.
Yeah. That's interesting because yeah, I know GM had a problem when they were selling some of their cars. They had to narrow the car or get smaller
Mhm.
versions of it because of the European roads and the tunnels and different things like that. So
Yeah.
interesting. The You brought up some great points and intentionality being that key one. Do you find that um energy is a key one in whatever you do? Because I think, to me, it reminds me of the analogy of, when you're on a plane and the air masks come down, you need to put that on yourself first, because if you can't take care of another person, you're no good to anybody. And so do you think that the energy helps? Obviously, I think that helps you to get things done. What is your value of the energetic piece of your tenants?
Um, so the value of energetic for me, it focuses more on excitement and joy.
Okay.
And as a kid, I'm a missionary kid, I learned this great little song, "The Joy of the Lord is my strength." And it was, his music, his something keeps me laughing, haha. And when I think about joy, and this is where I go back to my mother, where she's a little bit of an inspiration here. My mother was like a bottle of champagne. She would walk into a room and it would just bubble, it would pop, and it was just amazing. And so when I think about joy, because when she saw you, she would like scrunch up her face and get all excited. I mean, that's just her personality. And so when I think about the way energy plays a role in my life, it fuels my optimism, and it fuels my courage, and it fuels all of that. But it's also something, Brendan Burchard puts it really well this way. He says we have to decide about to actually create energy. He said his analogy, I don't know if you've heard this one, about the power plant. They don't have energy, they have to create energy, right? They
Right.
have to do something with it. So again, it's the active pursuit of deciding to choose joy, to choose and to generate excitement, and to be smart about it. Because when I talk about the energy being the sail, it's not the wind that actually makes it go. The wind is always there, usually, but in St. Petersburg, the wind is
Yeah.
always there. I've been there, it's always there. um, but you have to get the sail turned in the right direction. So it's really harnessing the wind, and it doesn't have to be something that, I don't always have energy. I had a long day yesterday and I went to bed gobsmacked tired. And I mean, like, I was almost felt like drugged, so tired, and I slept like the dead. And I haven't done that in a really long time, but I got a lot of things going on and some good stuff. I mean, some really exciting stuff that's happening in my business, and working some things out. And I woke up this morning and I thought, oh, I slept well. So part of energy too is being willing to step back and reflect, and take that time to rejuvenate and to refresh.
Yeah.
And see, they all touch each other. It's like a spider web. You
And
can't just leave one. Yeah.
no, you can't. And that's what's so interesting, because that energy, you've got to take that rest to get that energy back. Like you said,
Yeah.
you're drained yesterday and you slept, you got some rest, and now you're back at it doing it again. And that excitement allows you to have the optimism and go after what you want. The one that always strikes me though is courageous, because I think a lot of people, you think of the cowardly lion and the Wizard of Oz. He didn't have his courage, but he wanted that courage bad. But what did that really mean? And do you find people holding back because of courage? Is there more one of these tenets that maybe you see more in people, that maybe would hold them back? Anything like that?
I think that I see more, like when I interview people for my podcast, which it's every other week. I interview a woman that I think represents different pieces or all of them of
Right.
intentional optimism. The one that keeps popping up is courageous, that they live a courageous life. They have stepped out and done something that they never thought they were going to be a leader. And for me, leadership falls under courage
Right.
and being willing to be adventurous. You said a phrase that I use all the time: try new things.
Yeah.
And because, you know, we have to create those new pathways in our brain. It's really easy to get complacent. I think that courage pops up more as something that women that I talk to exhibit rather than back off from.
Okay.
And I think that courage looks different than we expect it to. I think that's what it is. Courage. Yeah. So for instance, I interviewed a young mother several weeks ago whose baby at 7 weeks old was not thriving, and he ended up needing a full liver transplant. And so that was almost 2 years of his life they spent in and out of the hospital. And she and her husband decided to open a coffee company in order to benefit child life services there in the DC area, so that other families would have things like coffee in the middle of the night. And so I found them to be very courageous, living their story. They didn't, you know, to them, it's just their story. They just did it. So I find courage actually shows up many times in ways that we don't expect it at all. I had another woman who tackles international homelessness, and she ended up speaking to the UN. And how did you do that? It just happened, right? I think the one that I think people have the most challenge with is present. And
yeah, our society doesn't let you be present. You're going 900 miles an hour, 20 different directions all the time.
Yeah. And, you know, we talk about that. And the one podcast episode of mine is the importance of being present. That's the one that gets the most downloads, right? And I'm not sharing anything profound, or I am sharing a little bit different, because I think that being present has a lot more to do with facing out than facing in. And sometimes people want you to think that you have to face inward to be present. And I want to say, no. In order to be present, you have to be in your surroundings. And Bob Goff, I don't know if you know Bob Goff. As be where your feet are. And so I've taken that on as one too. And I have always loved to take pictures of my feet walking on the beach, you know, just looking down. And I don't ever know why. And I think that's why, because it resonates. It's like a reminder of this is where I am. It means that I am in a conference room surrounded by people who really don't want to be here. So how can I make this better? Or I am at home with my husband trying to work and my son trying to do school. How can I make it better? That's what being present is. And so when I describe it as being the center board of your sailboat, it's the thing that counterbalances all that energy, right? If we want to have energy, we have to have a balance. So I think that's the one that people have the most challenge with. And it's not even the distractedness. I think a lot of it is the turning inward rather than turning outward.
Interesting. Well, thank you for that. That's a great explanation to help clarify that. Now, Andrea, where can people get more information about what you do and your podcast and everything like that? Tell us more about that.
Sure. My website is theintentionaloptimist.com, and I have a Facebook group called Intentional Optimists, and it's a global group of women that is basically building a community of living the tenets of intentional optimism. We have a book club in there. In January, we did Atomic Habits. In February, we did The One Thing, which if you really want productivity and you really want values, that's a good book. So I have that. And I am a one-on-one coach, but I am literally, yesterday was on a Zoom call with Marco Polo Channels. I am launching a membership, and a membership channel. I mean, I hate to say group because it's on Marco Polo Channels, but I'll tell you, I've got a beta group going in Marco Polo. I don't know if you're familiar with that platform.
No.
So it's basically video texting. It's asynchronous. I work with high performing, really busy women. That's who I identify with. And we don't have time to all sit down in a Zoom meeting. And I am also going to be doing a group program as well, with a once a month Zoom meeting and then asynchronous work. But I find that women need like-minded and they need mastermind, but they can't always get together. Plus, I grew up overseas. So for me, I have a global mindset. In my first cohort, I have a woman in Great Britain. I have somebody in Austin. In my second cohort, I have somebody in Portugal, and I have somebody in Hawaii. So getting everybody at one time is really hard. Marco Polo allows us to back and forth, see our faces, see our eyes, see each other's eyes. And Channels is Marco Polo's answer to coaches. They created that when coaches started saying, I like using Marco Polo with my clients. Can you put a platform together where I can actually do that on a more productive way? So it's a one-to-many coaching platform. Right now, it's slated to launch April 1. So this will all be on my Facebook page, in my Facebook group. I'm on Instagram, The Intentional Optimist. But I would love to have, because I think even April 1 is going to be like the third cohort. It'll be a low price kind of thing. But that's where you can find me. I love relating to people face to face when I can, but I love doing it on video.
Well, it allows you to do it across the globe.
Yes.
And that's what I like. I've had podcasts with people in Australia, the Czech Republic, here in Florida, as well as out in British Columbia and Canada and the West Coast. So yeah, it's definitely a nice medium to be able to do things with.
And then, of course, there's my podcast, which is Intentional Optimists, Unconventional Leaders. And because I think that women are the untapped resource. And I think especially coming through this pandemic, we're kind of right on a really nice precipice, especially with a new vice president who's a female. I would love to coach the next female president, right? So that's, I think, how we can do that. And as we lift each other up instead of tearing each other down, which is so common in the corporate structure, it's time to stop that. So.
Yeah, we definitely, let's just get along, people. We're people. We eat bread,
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Well, thank you, Andrea. I'm going to have all that information in the show notes and on the information about the show, so we'll put that in here as well. But I wanted to thank you today for taking the time to be on the Encouragement Engineering podcast, and thank you for sharing your knowledge, your insight with our audience. We'll definitely be looking forward to that. And check out what Andrea is offering. It's some great information, great tenets. See what she's about. So, Andrea, thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks. All right. You have a great day.
You too.